Welcome to the Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series. I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to this expert interview where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is Brian Wagner. Brian is the founder and CEO of A Radical Vision. His mission is to help people embrace their own personal blindness to achieve a greater vision for their lives. The process takes people from a point of blindness into sight and toward a greater vision. Brian was born and raised in Northwest Ohio as the son of a tomato farmer and the youngest of 10, yes, that was 10 kids. In 1977, at the age of 10, he was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a brain malformation. Over the course of the next 33 years, he experienced several instances of medical issues resulting from this diagnosis. On March 4th of 2011, he woke up on the couch and wasn't able to see. For the next 6 months, Brian was blind. Only brain surgery and multiple eye surgeries have allowed a portion of his vision to return. Since then, Brian has become an author of the semi-autobiographical book, Sometimes It Does Take a Brain Surgeon. He uses his experience to help his audience to improve their lives by teaching them how to see what they are missing as a result of their own blindness. Brian, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm looking forward to this discussion today because there are many topics that have really been at the forefront of what's been going on in 2020. And I'm not just talking about the pandemic. Obviously, that's a key one. But I'm talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's been such an important workplace topic for decades. And yet this year, it has come into sharp focus as a result of so much of the racial unrest and tensions. Many times, the inclusion aspect of diversity, equity, inclusion sometimes gets overlooked, in my opinion. When we think about creating inclusive workplaces, we're often hear this from the race and gender perspectives. Today, we're going to explore inclusion from a different perspective, and that's from the perspective of individuals with diverse and different abilities. In my experience, inclusion is about acknowledging and respecting differences. We're all different. We all have different strengths and abilities. And yet, for individuals with what we often call disabilities, or prefer to refer to as different abilities, it may be difficult to acknowledge or feel comfortable talking about those differences. So, Brian, I'm curious from your perspective and from your life experience of what you've been going through, and especially with the work that you do, how do we talk about diverse and different abilities in the workplace?
For me, it has to do with not so much making a different section or a different specialty or making something different for the audience you're talking to. For example, if you're talking with people with visual disabilities like I have, it's not so much of doing something totally different for them, but maybe offering them a additional braille or whatever help would help them to be able to follow along. So it's not to make it like a totally different program. So the more you can make it mainstream and make them feel a part of the mainstream, the better off you're going to be.
Well, certainly there are legal requirements for employers to make accommodations for employees in the workplace. But when I'm thinking about this from the perspective of, do we acknowledge? So when you're going into work settings with clients or colleagues, to what extent do we openly talk about and address, what might be the elephant in the room? How do we make people still feel comfortable and yet acknowledge that we have differences and we are open and accepting of individuals with those differences?
personally, I think you need to leave it up to the person with the disability to say, because for me, I'm very open with my disability. I make fun of it to some extent. I call myself Brian with one eye. I have fun with it. So from my perspective, it's much different and maybe different than other people's perspective. But you have to make that person feel comfortable being there in the room with you. But at the same time, you need to do everything you can to make it accessible to them. So yes, following the rules that are in the laws that are already written is one thing, but to not single them out and not to make them feel singled out is important as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, a big part of one of the models that we use in well-being is around, has two dimensions to it. The model itself has six dimensions to it, but two of those dimensions are community and connection. And what we really want to be doing in creating a culture in the workplace, and one that is inclusive, is helping people, create these connections, is feeling that sense of belonging in the workplace. We want everybody to feel, I mean, after all, that is what inclusion is all about, is
Right.
making people feel like they belong.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very true. Very accurate. And it's very important.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, when we think about the impact to organizations and teams of recognizing and leveraging the diverse abilities of individuals, what might those impacts be to an organization and to a team?
Oh, right. So it's very important to have a team acknowledge that and to make sure that, for example, the 360 interviews, where you typically have they come back to you, the manager will come back to you and say, well, you're very strong in this area, and you can use some work in this area, but you're also strong in this area. Kind of the sandwich effect or sandwich approach to the review. But and they always, well, not always, but many times they want you to work on that area where you have the least or the lowest efficiency. So I would take a different approach on that. And I would say maybe we should just focus on what they're good at, make them better at what they're good at, make them more awesome, and then allow them to be able to have that weak spot. Let's say it's accounting where they're not as strong. Have other members of the team fill in where they're strong, and if they're strong in accounting, then they fill that gap. So it's not so much of making them do work on things that they're not focused on or they're not strong at, but it's helping them to think about things that they can do better that they're already doing well at.
Well, totally agree. I'm always a believer in the strengths approach, and rather than focusing on the deficiencies, but that's a great way to think about it. I'm curious about in the work that you're doing, when you're helping people embrace their own personal blindness to achieve a greater vision. You're helping individuals see their own blind spots. I'm curious if a blind spot for many individuals is not seeing others for their uniqueness, their differences, and by creating and therefore by doing that, creating a less inclusive workplace. So talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so the work that I'm doing with clients that I have, we've talked a lot about how important it is to be inclusive and to understand the value that individuals are bringing from their perspective. And so there's blind spots when we don't do that, but also there are blind spots that we have where we don't always recognize the value that someone else is bringing. Sometimes we don't recognize the value that we're bringing when we have conversations with people and what we do to help them. If we're not able to recognize that value, I use my daughter as an example. She sent me a letter after I'd had brain surgery in 2011 because I'd lost my eyesight. And she sent me a letter, and in the letter she said, well, yeah, other people's dads are great. I mean, they're younger than you, and they're sportier, and they're funner, but you've got something that they don't have: bravery. So she showed me to stop comparing myself to other people. And this is how I look at it. She said, stop comparing myself to other people. Stop worrying about how other people are handling their lives, and worry about the fact that you are my dad and you bring a lot of value as my dad. And the bravery that you have shown her is been just one of those things that's helped her so much throughout her life. And it's a letter that we still talk about, 10 years later. So that letter really exemplifies what it is that we're trying to do with our coaching clients and all that, is to help them understand that they need to stop comparing themselves to other people. They need to recognize the value that they bring. And then, they just need to know that the awesomeness within them is something that is going to help other people. And the further they can understand that, the better they can understand that, the better off they're going to be.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story about your daughter and the letter from your daughter. She certainly is wise beyond her years. It really does, I think, help us understand that we all have blind spots and we all have places where we can perhaps take a different perspective or look at things a little bit differently. And we can do that not only about ourselves, but the other people that are working with us in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's critically important for us all to understand.
Absolutely. How can employers nurture a culture of inclusiveness? What specifically should they be doing, do you think, Brian?
How can corporations nurture a culture of inclusiveness? I mean, I think that accepting people and not singling people out is the first part of doing that. Is not getting to a point where they really have a practice in place, to make sure that this group is being cared for and given nurturing. But I think it's more about just making sure that they're a part of the team, that they've come along with whatever disabilities they have, to understand that that they have value, that they bring value. And it's much like what I was referring to earlier with the 360 review, where you have a good part and a bad part, and then you have a good part. Well, they have good parts, bad parts, and good parts as well. They're no different than any of us. They actually see a lot of things that we don't see. So understanding, the better you understand your employees, the better off you're going to be. And I don't care whether that's normally sighted, normally mobile, neurotypical, any of that, or if it's someone with disabilities. It doesn't matter. They're all the same to a certain extent.
Right. We all have strengths. We all bring value to the organization. We're all unique individuals, and we need to be honoring and respecting that.
Absolutely.
Brian, if our audience wants to learn more about you and the work that you are doing, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and my handle on all four of them is aradicalvision.com. I'm sorry, aradicalvision. And if they want to find me on my website, it is aradicalvision.com.
Fabulous. Well, Brian, thanks so much for being here for this conversation today. As always, it's wonderful to spend time with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Mari.